Hey, what's going on, AP peeps? There is a brand new textbook that I'm going to begin doing chapter review videos for. This one is for American History by Henrietta. It is the 8th edition, and it is aligned to the new AP curriculum. So we're going to start off with chapter 1, which is Colliding Worlds from 1450 to 1600. If you'd like to download the PowerPoint that is used in this presentation, just follow the link in the description below. Let's get started. All right, we're going to start off talking about Native Americans, and these were the first Americans on the American continent. And many people came to the Americas in the north and then migrated all the way down to the south via the Bering Strait. And around 6000 BCE, or before a Common Era, the Indians began raising crops, particularly maize. And maize simply means corn. And this had tremendous impact on Native American life. It helped encourage population growth, especially in present-day Mexico. So really in the middle of the two continents is where you see a large Native American population. So let's talk about some of these American empires before Europeans came over. We have the Aztec Empire, and its capital was Tenochtitlan, which was the largest city in the Americas. And they established trading routes throughout the empire, throughout the Aztec Empire, and they also used tributes, the Aztecs. And this means receiving a payment, usually in the form of a tax. Chiefdoms and confederacies existed as well. And again, we see maize becoming a major crop throughout Central and North America. In the Mississippi Valley, we see lots of growing of maize. And in the eastern woodlands, we're talking about the eastern portion of the present-day United States, villages were built around maize fields, and also during the non-farming season, you would see Native Americans hunting and gathering as well. Women were in charge of crops, and they played an instrumental role in community affairs. So women in Native American culture had a much larger role in society than did women in European cultures. And the Iroquois are a famous example of Native Americans located in central and western New York. They were a matriarchal society, which means that power was based on female families as opposed to male families. So if your mom came from a wealthy family, you would be wealthy as well, not so much based on the father. In the Great Plains area, and by the way, this is aligned perfectly. You're expected to know the Great Plains according to the new APUSH curriculum. And I encourage you to look in the video for the key concept videos I'm doing, which breaks down the AP curriculum by period. And in the Great Plains of the Rockies, we see Native Americans would hunt buffalo, and they were largely nomadic due to a lack of natural resources. And we're going to see when the Spanish introduced the horse, it's going to drastically change the way the Plains Indians live. In the southwest portion of the current United States, they are also based on agriculture, again, maize. There's no crop that had more of an impact on Native American life than maize, and they built elaborate irrigation systems to help grow this crop. And the Pueblo Indians are a group of people that base their agriculture system on maize, and they're specifically mentioned in the new curriculum as well, especially the Pueblo Revolt, which we'll talk about in future chapters. The Pacific Coast, especially the Pacific Northwest up here, we have the Chinooks, who were strong warriors, and they relied heavily on fishing, and they also built elaborate canoes to travel and fish as well. So let's talk about patterns of trade. Many Indians traded with each other throughout the Americas. We would see trade fairs pop up between nomadic Navajos, the natives that would really hunt a lot and were constantly on the move, and the Pueblos in the southwest, those that lived in more permanent villages. Maize would be traded for meat, for furs, and for other supplies. And when we're talking about Native American religion, we're going to talk about animism, and this is religion associated with nature. And Indians respected animals they hunted by performing rituals. They would do this before, during, and after their hunt. And they believed this was a way of respecting nature. All right, we're going to talk about Western contact now, the edge of the old world. So let's talk about hierarchy and authority. European families were based on patriarchal, unlike the matriarchal with the Iroquois Indians. And this means that property and wealth was based on male families. Females gave up many rights when they were married. They gave up their name, they gave up all property, and they were expected to submit to their husbands. So married females had very few rights based on European tradition and custom. Primogeniture is this idea practiced by many countries that the eldest son would inherit most of the wealth. So if you have a very rich father who has 3 sons, the eldest son would get most, if not all, that wealth, and the other 2 would get very little. I am the youngest son, so sadly for me, if we were still following by this, I would get nothing. Later, this encouraged immigration to the colonies, especially for those younger sons. So if I were living in, say, England during this time, I most likely would want to emigrate from England and come to the colonies because I would not have a lot of money and wealth waiting for me. Peasant society, most individuals in Europe were poor individuals, were peasants, and they were mostly farmers, and they made up most of the immigrants to America as they were coming here for land and for opportunities for wealth, among others. And half of the children died before age 21. So think about that. 21 is what you were expected, is what half the people were expected to live to. That means you would have a midlife crisis at like 10 or 11. That's an early age to have a midlife crisis at. Merchant cities began to grow drastically all over Europe during this time, which would encourage exploration, and guilds helped to regulate trade. So myths, religion, and holy warriors, the Roman Catholic Church had tremendous power in Western Europe. It was arguably the most powerful institution in Western Europe. Individuals involved in heresies or ideas that were inconsistent with Christianity were persecuted. So if you really spoke out and encouraged things that went against Christianity, you would be persecuted. Then we have the Reformation, or the Protestant Reformation, which really began with Martin Luther when he supposedly posted his 95 Theses. And the number one thing he was protesting was the sale of indulgences, this belief that if you would pay the church, your sins would be forgiven. This inspires other people, including John Calvin, who comes out with this idea of predestination, the idea that God determines prior to you being born whether you will be saved or not after your death, and there was nothing you could do while you were alive to change that. That becomes very popular when we're talking about the Puritans in the next couple chapters. They believe in predestination. And England becomes a Protestant nation. They switch from Catholicism and they become Protestant, and the king will have a large role in religion in England. The Reformation weakened the strength of Catholicism in Europe. You have England, a major power, no longer being a Catholic nation. So let's go to Africa, particularly West Africa, and you can see West Africa highlighted on this map. Most of the African slave trade that will develop was based out of West Africa, especially along the coastline there, because the Europeans did not have immunity to diseases that were located in the interior of Africa. And kings and princes in Africa were regarded as divine, or being like God themselves. And we have three major empires in Africa: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, and all of them used extensive trade routes, and they traded gold. And they would use their military to control these trade routes, and it was all about gold. They had an incredible amount of gold. You would see Islam beginning to spread over trade routes in Africa, especially with Mansa Musa. And much like Native Americans, many Africans practiced versions of animism and were polytheistic. They believed in many gods, but they did have elements of animism like the Native Americans. All right, the Portuguese are going to begin to explore, and they'll really be the first powerhouse when it comes to exploration. They had an extensive role in the exploration and in the African slave trade. They were the ones that were really going to West Africa and conducting the slave trade. They established trading posts in West Africa, and Europeans had very little luck exploring the interior of the African continent. As I just mentioned, there was diseases that they were not immune to, like malaria, and the interior was also well defended by African militaries. The African slave trade begins to develop, and this is slavery that is not new to the Western Hemisphere, to the Americas. This was something that has been practiced really by civilizations throughout history. But what is new, or what will begin to develop that is new with this slavery, is that children of slaves would then become slaves. So even though slavery was widespread throughout Europe and Africa prior to the introduction of slavery into the Americas, we will see it change. Slaves were used in the beginning on sugar plantations, particularly in the Caribbean where sugar was grown. It is a arduous task to grow sugar, and slaves were used for that task. In the mid-16th century, so the mid-1500s here, the African slave trade expanded drastically and was used in South America. And sugar became very profitable, and the more profits that plantation owners could make off of sugar, the more labor they needed, and they went to Africa to get slave labor. In the 1500s, we also see incursions dealing with religion. The Reconquista is the Spanish Catholics trying to get rid of Muslims in Europe. So they try to drive Muslims out of Europe. And they also lead an inquisition against alleged Christian heretics, or those who were kind of speaking out against Christianity and Catholicism. And you would see that some of these individuals would even be burned alive. Spain, we're going to focus on now in the Western Hemisphere. We have conquistadors, or these Spanish conquerors, who would come to the Americas and just absolutely devastate Native American populations. One of these conquistadors was Hernan Cortez. He led 600 men, and he was able to defeat the Aztecs at Tenochtitlan. And many of the Aztecs were defeated due to disease, and the number one disease really was smallpox. So in addition to Europeans having more advanced military technology, the number one thing that they had on their side when it came to combating Native Americans was disease. And here is an Aztec drawing of smallpox infecting Native Americans. Another conquistador is Francisco Pizarro. He defeated the Incas in Peru. And what are the effects of these Spanish invasions? Well, again, the number one thing is that disease and war killed many Indians. And in 1500, there were 20 million Indians in the Americas. And by 1650, 150 years later, there's only 3 million left. And Portugal is going to focus on conquering Brazil. That's why today, in present-day Brazil, they speak Portuguese. And really, the rest of Latin America, they speak Spanish, because the Spanish will go beyond Brazil and focus more on the interior of the Americas. All right, that is chapter 1 of America's history for you. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below or ask me on Twitter at APUSH_review. If you have not already, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and help share this with your teachers or friends or anybody you think would find it beneficial. I appreciate you guys watching this, and have a good day.